All right, so my name is Jeff Rametta, and I'm in the Technical Marketing Solutions Lab here at Brocade. And I'll be showing you a demo of OpenStack integration with Brocade VCS Fabrics. Before I do so, is everybody here familiar with OpenStack? You've all heard of OpenStack? Maybe used it before already?
Yep.
Okay.
Maybe we can learn a little bit from the user.
Exactly.
At least a few guys.
Okay, so if I can figure out. Okay, so before I get into this actual demo, I'm going to introduce to you a number of characters in order to sort of create a storyline for this demo. We've got here Susie, among others. She is a software engineer at a company, and she's developing an application where she needs access to virtual machines in order to test her application. And so Susie, and this is an example of cloud service delivery without service orchestration like OpenStack. And so Susie, she gets on the phone with Raj, and she says, "Hey Raj, I need 4 virtual machines with this much hardware resources, this much this much disk space. The network has these particular requirements, and I need these resources, ASAP. I'm running late. I need to do this testing." And Raj says, "Well, sorry, Susie, you're number 12 on the waiting list, and it's going to take a little bit of time for me to get these resources for you." And so Susie hangs up. She's kind of upset that it's going to take a while. And Raj does what the proper way of doing things. He opens up tickets with the server admin, the storage admin, and the network admin in order to obtain these resources that Susie needs. And each of these administrators need to reserve resources, right? The compute resources, the storage resources, the network resources. And then these guys need to coordinate with each other in order to get the virtual machines for Susie. And this coordination is kind of prone to errors. It's very inefficient, and it takes a while for the virtual machines to actually be deployed and given to Susie. So if we take a look at the same sort of scenario in an OpenStack environment where we have private cloud orchestration, we still have Susie, and she still needs access to virtual machines. But we've got now Bob here. He's a solutions architect, and Bob designs the tenant architecture. He creates the SLAs, and he creates the solution catalogs for users. And then we have Kay, the IT admin, who deploys the overall hardware infrastructure, the software resources, and then she publishes these templates to be available to end users. And then we have Susie, who is hiding behind the OpenStack logo. She still needs her VMs, but now she's interacting with a system. And what she does is she accesses a self-service portal called the dashboard, and she makes a few clicks of the mouse in order to actually get access to these resources. And now it only takes a matter of minutes in order for Susie to get her virtual machines. And so for this demo, what we're going to be doing is playing the part of Susie, and we're going to deploy an application using OpenStack, and we're going to see how it integrates with Brocade VCS technology, and we'll see how simple it is to deploy application solutions using these two technologies. Okay, so for our application, Susie is going to deploy something called WordPress. And you guys are mostly bloggers. I think you're all familiar what WordPress is. It's a
WordPress thing you're discussing. Teach us more.
Yeah, so it's a typical LAMP stack application. And for the purposes of this demo, really, you can think of it kind of as this diagram here on the right, where you have some users using a web browser. They access a web server through a public network or an outside network. And then this web server with some PHP scripts talks to a backend database server through a private or an inside network. Okay, so this is a real multi-tier web application that we're deploying here. And so what would Susie do to actually deploy this application? Well, first she would connect to the OpenStack dashboard using a web browser. Once she logs in, she's going to go through the process of creating these networks. And so she'll create an outside network and an inside network. Okay, and we'll see how simple it is to do this using a few clicks of the mouse. Once that's done, Susie can deploy her virtual machines. And so we'll deploy an Apache web server at the web tier, and then a MySQL database at the database tier. And then once that's done, her application deployment is essentially complete. Susie can access her application, make sure everything's running, maybe upload any user data, and then make this application available to end users. Okay, so this is the actual physical topology of what we have set up in our lab. At the bottom, we have a couple Linux KVM servers running the OpenStack software. And if you're familiar with OpenStack, right, we've got OpenStack controller nodes. This does essentially all the orchestration within OpenStack. It runs all the services. This is where users connect to in order to manage and deploy VMs. And then you have OpenStack compute nodes. This is basically where the actual VMs get deployed to. And so you can have one or more OpenStack compute nodes within your infrastructure.
What's the net mask on this topology?
What is the net mask?
Yeah, so are we looking at separate networks, or is this one flat network here? Are they /24s?
Yeah, so this is actually the management IP addresses that are shown here. This is our lab network. It's actually a /20.
Okay, so it's all one. Great, thanks.
There's some technical difficulties. Okay, so in the middle here we've got, of course, the Brocade VCS Fabric. And here we expose the RESTful API in order for OpenStack to talk to us. And what this allows us to do is, or what this allows OpenStack to do is to reconfigure our network based on what users do within the dashboard. And the underlying mechanism that we use, if you're familiar with VDX, is port profiles. And so port profiles allow you to create a specific network policy for a virtual machine. So this is stuff like VLAN information, quality of service information, security information. And then at the top here we have the people, the end users, the cloud users who manage virtual machines through the dashboard, and then the people who actually ultimately access the applications deployed through OpenStack. Okay, a little bit under the hood, right? If you're familiar with OpenStack, right, there's a bunch of different pieces to OpenStack. Nova is the compute piece. I think the dashboard is Horizon. There's Cinder, the block storage piece. Quantum, of course, is the network piece, and that's the part that Brocade is contributing to. And this is where we've created the VCS plugin that allows OpenStack to talk to our switches. And so in the demo, you see when we create a network, what actually happens behind the scenes is that OpenStack says create a network to our VCS Fabric, and we'll end up creating VLAN information and port profiles for those particular networks. And then that information is actually propagated or distributed to all the nodes within the fabric for consistency. And then when Susie deploys a virtual machine through OpenStack, the MAC address of that VM is then tied to one of those port profiles that were previously created. And then what that means is as soon as that VM boots up, the network is already reconfigured, and Susie can begin accessing that server through the network. Okay. So let's take a look at the actual demo. So before we get to the dashboard, let's just take a look at the CLI of our VDX switch. Okay, if you're familiar with VDX commands, I can do a show fabric all. This shows all the nodes within our fabric. So as per the diagram, there were two VDX switches in our fabric, VDX1 and VDX2. And these two VDXs are pretty much unconfigured. The only thing that I set up was the management IP address and cabled them together. If I do a show port profile, there are no existing port profiles on the system except for the default one that gets installed during boot up. Okay, so it is basically an out-of-box config setup, So now we're going to switch over to Susie's interface. This is the OpenStack dashboard. And we'll log into the dashboard as Susie. And when Susie logs in, she gets an overview of her current overall cloud usage. Right now, she hasn't deployed anything, so this screen is pretty much blank. If you recall from the slide, the first step that Susie needs to do in order to deploy her application is to create the network, or the two networks. So here we can click on the Networks tab and click on Create Network. And here we can give the network a name. So we have one network called the Inside Network. Okay, Susie wants to specify a VLAN ID, she can specify one. If she doesn't care about what VLAN ID it is, she can just leave this blank and the network will actually choose one for her. So we click on Create Network. Okay, so from the point of view of OpenStack, this network has been successfully created. I don't know if this is my laptop or what. No? Okay. So I apologize for the technical difficulties. If we switch back over to our VDX just to see what actually happened behind the scenes, and we run show port profile again, you can see there's been another port profile that's been created, and it chooses VLAN ID 92 for this particular network. And not only that, if I switch to the other tab, this is the second VDX node in our fabric, and I run that same command over here, show port profile, you can see this information has also been distributed to this node as well. Okay, so for this application, we still need one more additional network, our public network. So we'll create that network as well. And for this one, I'll specify a VLAN ID of 100. I'll click on Create Network. And so now we have two networks for our application. Just to look over here again, you can see if I do show port profile, another port profile has been created for that network.
Good question.
Mm-hmm.
Can you set up to create arbitrary VLAN IDs on its own? Or is it absolutely, does the end user have to specify it?
Yeah, so the first one I did when I created the inside network, I just left that field blank. And when that happens, you can just
Stick over there. Okay, thank you.
Going through the code, they have a get next VLAN attribute in their plugin. So if you don't define it, I'll just get the logical next one.
Basically,
I didn't see logic for figuring out if you ran out of VLANs.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, what happens when you run out, hit the end,
In the code,
It defaults to
just
1 to
breaks,
1,000.
blows up quality.
Okay, one more command here, show port profile status. And if you're familiar with VDX, right, this basically shows which virtual machines are currently attached to any port profile. Since we haven't actually deployed any VMs, they're under here associated MAC, it says none. And so when we deploy a VM, we should actually see information under this tab. So let's go back over to the OpenStack dashboard. And from the Images and Snapshots tab, here Susie can select from a menu of different virtual machines to deploy. And so since we're deploying WordPress, we can just click on Launch. And we can give the server a name. We'll just call it WordPress 01. And here we choose the hardware requirements for this particular VM. So the CPU, disk space, memory requirements. And then we click Launch. And so now this virtual machine is building in the background. If we switch back over to our VDX again, just to see what happens, we do a show port profile status again, and you can see those MAC addresses now associated with those port profiles. So this web server has one network interface in the public network, one network interface in the private database tier network. Okay. And so while this VM is building, let's launch the other instance, the MySQL backend. And we'll go through the same process, give it a name, database 1, choose the hardware requirements, and then click Launch. Okay, so now that VM is building, and while that was happening, our initial VM is already built. It's in an active state. From here, we can actually get console access to this virtual machine. And we can log in. Okay, and if I do an ifconfig, you can see this virtual machine has two network interfaces. And the MAC addresses ending in F9, E8, and 6650, right, correspond to what has been applied to the port profiles that were made before. Okay, and you see those two IP addresses for these. Let's just check on the other VM really quick. Okay, should be done building in a minute or two. Okay, so this VM is done building. We can get console access to this one as well. Okay, and you can see the database server's IP address is 1.20. So from the Apache web server, just to verify network connectivity, I'll ping to the database server through the private network. And so we have network access through the private network. So we can actually see that these port profiles have been activated and the network has been reconfigured in order to allow these two virtual machines to talk to each other. So really, the only thing now is to verify that our application is up and running is to actually run the WordPress application, make sure it's working. So this is the public IP address.
Pardon my ignorance with OpenStack. In theory, you could script this to do thousands of massive amounts of VM deployments at once, simultaneously, if you wanted to. If you want to deploy 50 or 60 or 100, you can just let it churn out and they're done.
Sure, you could.
Wow, that's really impressive.
Well, you can call through the API too, so you don't have to go through the GUI.
Okay,
Right.
so you can like load up an XML or something and push something to it.
It's RESTful. Yeah. You can say,
Wow.
And the other important thing is, for the whole VCS cluster,
Yeah.
the API, the message is just one going down there, right? Instead of having those messages go to individual VDXs. So if you, when you want to even scale this to 50, 60,000 VMs, that becomes really important.
Yeah. I was thinking, like, if you're a service provider or a web hosting provider, you can just one button pretty much, and you've got
Right.
your customers
And
provisioned done.
furthermore, this is
figuration.
orchestration is really at service level, right? So AMPP gives you the ACL, the QoS level service instead of going and doing a line configuration, a port configuration, and then having all those 20 messages. It's just one set of message going out there.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I see that you checked in this plugin on the 9th, like 2 days ago, or checked in for review.
I don't even know, actually.
Yeah.
So
It's in review.
Yes.
And you have the ability to configure VLANs, mainly focused around segregating tenancy, and see some comments in the review about mapping in some of your future multi-tenant features, guessing VRF Lite to the tenant IDs inside of there. Earlier in the discussions today around VDX, there's this talk of service instantiation frameworks. I might be using the wrong name, but the idea of layering a service on the fabric. Where are you driving your contributions to Quantum and in layering in the services that you're talking about bringing into your VCS Fabric in conjunction with kind of the service framework that's evolving for Quantum towards a gradually release?
So one thing is that our engagement we're still early in the engagement, right? So we're trying to bring the right balance of influence. One of the things that we are seeing is currently Quantum relies a lot more on having a virtual switch, right? So making sure that the virtualness does not just remain in the hypervisor environment, but VCS is also provides the virtual environment on a physical topology.
Okay.
So having that intelligence within the Quantum, right, is also something that.
So you're just talking about providing layer 3 services instead of doing
something that
on the host.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I definitely wouldn't think of it as an either-or
Right.
thing at all, right? I mean, we want to be able to make VCS fabrics as intrinsically valuable as we can, because not everybody's going to go down the OpenStack route, obviously. At the same time, just for scale of orchestration, clearly, OpenStack is the way to go over what you can do within a single path.
What I didn't see was, one of the promise obviously is the self-provision security. What are y'all doing, since you're passing this through transparently, you're not applying IP tables on the hypervisor, right?
So that's something that we need to be also get educated on, because I think from the Quantum perspective also, do you feel we have the right amount of security levels today? Something that
That's a really long and complicated discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, in the context of Quantum, it's only been, Quantum has just been rolled into as core. And there's been a lot of discussions about whether services layers should be included in Quantum. Should it be pulled? Should it be outside of Quantum and called via an API? And I think it looks like it's firming up to yes, that's going to be contained in Quantum. But I think that's going to be a huge discussion for next week's design summit.
Well,
Yeah,
and I think
and really the how is.
Well, and so it's gonna, if you're a hyperscale public cloud provider, you want to be able to enable that self-provisioning aspect. So that's IP tables and it's DNS masquerading. So I mean, it's these Linux things that have been around forever. But in the enterprise, I think you're going to start seeing, you need to be able to apply this holistic policy framework, and it needs to be audited and that sort of thing. So where that fits on the edge, left up to the tenant, that's where I start seeing that central policy piece.
Well, yeah, and too, I think we had a discussion last night. You don't have you don't have a procedure until it's automated, right? you just have a favor. Just questions. So for the contributions, so I mean, there's a lot of work going on around the storage space with Cinder. There's actually a lot of interesting work where Brocade could add value. What are the top projects which so I've seen your contributions around your plugin, but like VMware and Nicira, like Dan Windland will contribute all over the place. Where do you want to? Where is your team focused on contributing to the larger project?
So right now you will see, because we have some things that are going on the VDX side, the Ethernet Fabric side, but we also want to bring in some of the FC, the SAN, the storage knowledge. That's something that is started to put the gears on that. Frankly, we haven't seen so much traction on the FC side so far.
I would say fiber channel, but there's storage, more IP storage stuff going on.
Right. So yeah, it's something that we look forward to get a little more active.
Well, and with that, talking to the community, I mean, just to reiterate, Windland is all over the place. Like, that guy is a machine, and he's up all night posting.
And he recently had a baby, so I don't know how he manages.
Yeah, it's
what
impressive.
he was super human being. So.
Skype, lots of Skype with the
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah. So we were exchanging emails, and yes, we need to get a little more active than what we have been. And we've just started.
Yeah.
Oh, it isn't a criticism; it's a question. So.
It's a very fair question.
Yeah.
I think, to be totally candid with everything relating to SDN, whether we're talking about virtualization, OpenFlow, OpenStack, everybody's feeling their way. I mean, we're no different from anybody else in that regard. We definitely have a number of initiatives away along all of those trajectories. They're in varying degrees of maturity, and we'll talk about that more over the next couple of hours too. By the way, we didn't actually introduce Sandeep to you guys. Sandeep is my colleague on the marketing side for everything management, both our own management tools as well as things like OpenStack.
Right. So cloud manageability and orchestration. Glad to have you guys here. So I'll move around after in the break also to talk.
Is Shiv Harris part of your team directly?
Yes. He's part of our R&D architecture team. So and then we have our product management. Actually, we'll have our whole team down there next week. So both the product management, the R&D, and marketing. So.
Nice.
So, I just knocked on it. Oh, yeah. Just one more thing really quick, just to verify application is working, just to finish the demo up. The IP address, you can see at the bottom, 81.87 is the web server. And if everything's working correctly, we have our wizard to build our next blog. And so we can fill out this information, make sure everything's talking to the database server. But that's essentially the demo, and we can see that Susie has been able to actually go through the process and deploy a multi-tier web application within the matter of a few minutes. So, that's it. Cool. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.